Now let's move on. I mean, I'm talking about the 49ers receivers, and I want to talk about the 49ers and kind of what they have going on at the receiver position. Right now you look at the roster, there's a bunch of names. And not good names. I mean, obviously you have Ayuk and you have Debo. And I kind of look at it like, all right, both guys have kind of shown the ability to get hurt. Debo more so than Ayuk if you go back to Debo being in college and, time he missed and whatnot. But you look at it last year, Ayuk missed 4 games, 1 to COVID, but the other 3 due to injuries actually came in to the season injured. And then also missed 2 games to COVID. And then I think another one with the high ankle sprain, which I've never seen anything like what the 49ers dealt with last year with the high ankle sprains. That was like, that was crazy. But I started to kind of do some digging, right? And I'm like, well, maybe the 49ers aren't too worried about having just this pure wide receiver 3 because they don't run a ton of 11 personnel, right? And we're talking about 3 receivers on the field. So I did some digging. And actually my guy, Rich Madrid, brought it up and he was like, 11 personnel was the 49ers. They ran that a higher percentage of any formation. And I looked into it and I'm like, damn, they do. Like they run that 44% of the time. Now, 44% of the time running 11 personnel, they ran it more than any other personnel grouping, but it was still the second lowest. There was only 1 team or 2 teams that ran 11 personnel a lower percent of the time than the 49ers. So, with the rest of the league, it's not something that the 49ers do a lot when you compare them to where everybody else is, in the league. So, I have a great question here from Brandon Vincent where he says, is that because they don't have a wide receiver 3? And I would say no, because I think they were very comfortable with Kendrick Bourne being on the field and, working in that role. I think a lot of it had to do with just the way that Kyle Shanahan wants to run the offense and, wants to go through the running game. So, so 44% of the time in 2020, the 49ers ran 11 personnel, which was the third lowest or second lowest in the NFL. So I went back to 2019 and I'm like, well, let's see if in 2019 it was even better, any better than it was in 2020 as far as the percentage time that they ran 11 personnel. And it wasn't any better with the receivers that the 49ers had in 2019. It was 42%, so it actually dropped 2%. And I was thinking like, well, maybe it was higher 2020 because 49ers were down more, but 42%, which was third to last in the NFL as far as running 11 personnel groupings. So 49ers are not 11 personnel team. So when you look at that and you kind of factor in how Kyle Shanahan wants to run his offense, how much do you put on having a wide receiver 3? And what does that wide receiver 3 ideally have to look like? I think if you are in an offense like the Rams, where you're always going to have that wide receiver 3 on the field, I think they ran 11 personnel like it was one of the highest percent in the league. When you look at it like that, you would think that the 49ers don't really value the wide receiver 3 position as much. So they just want somebody that can come in and be consistent and kind of take control of that role. And when you look at that's what Kendrick Bourne has been. I think Kendrick Bourne, a lot of fans give him a hard time. I brought up his drops and everything like that. To me, his drops weren't as much of an issue as people think when you look at it from a game-to-game basis. I think when you look at his drop rate, I think that was probably a little bit higher. But 2019, Kendrick Bourne dropped 3 passes. And those 3 passes were, I can count them off the top of my head. He dropped 1 against the Steelers, and that was week 3 when the 49ers played Pittsburgh Steelers. And he kind of got scared a little bit going over the middle, dropped the ball. And then he dropped 2 against the Seattle Seahawks on Monday Night Football. 1 ended up getting picked off and taken back the other way by Diggs. But his drops weren't as big of an issue. And I thought he actually came through in a clutch a ton in 2019 in that season. Talk about 2 third down touchdown catches against the Saints. Really helped the 49ers win that game. Several catches in the playoffs where against the Vikings where he kind of really bailed out Jimmy Garoppolo. So he was a third down machine. Now, 2020, Bourne was probably on the field more. If I had to look at his snaps, I bet it was significantly higher than it was 2019. He dropped 6 passes. And I think 4 of them came in that one first half against, it was either Washington or Arizona. I don't know why I always get the game mixed up, but one of those games he had 4 drops in the first half. So, the rest of the year you talk about 15 games because he was out one game with COVID. He had 2 drops in the other 14 games in the season. So I think his drops were a little bit exaggerated, but 49ers don't have that guy, right? Like that was the guy that was able to kind of solidify that wide receiver 3 position. So now who's going to be? And you look at it and you see guys like Richie James. That's the first guy that comes to mind. And my thing with Richie James is like, well, why hasn't it been Richie James all along? This is a guy that was drafted by the 49ers. If you guys remember back to Richie James' rookie year, playing in the preseason against the Dallas Cowboys, first game, he was on the field. Trent Taylor, I think that was when Trent Taylor broke his foot or whatever. So they had to plug Richie James right in and came through, made a couple catches, actually had a really good, very productive rookie preseason where he caught like over 14 passes, over 100 yards. So it was like, man, he can be productive. He caught what was against Tampa Bay a couple years ago where he had that long touchdown catch down the left sideline. He's been very productive anytime he's given an opportunity, but they've kind of resorted to just playing him specifically on special teams. And you look at the one game against Green Bay, and I see Brandon talking about it in the comments. You see the one game against Green Bay where he was the only receiver that was available. Kendrick Bourne, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, all out due to COVID. And he had 9 catches, 180-something yards, a touchdown. And I don't take away from that's who Richie James is. Like, I'm not saying Richie is this prolific receiver, but I definitely think that he has the ability to be productive as a wide receiver 3. And now my question is, why isn't he? Why can't Richie James take control of that spot? And I think, maybe there's something up here. He's active every week, right? I mean, that was their primary return guy on punt return, kick returns. And even with that, he was a little inconsistent, but like he's active. It would be one thing if it's like, well, he's not active all the time or whatever, so he doesn't get a lot of opportunities. He's active. And if you kind of just watch the games, you'll see him out there probably more than you realize. Doesn't always get the ball. Actually is a really good blocker. He reminds me a lot of Emmanuel Sanders, like just with his ability, but the opportunity for whatever reason hasn't come. And I understand, roster politics and kind of how that whole thing works, but I feel like there have been definitely like several opportunities for him to kind of take control of that spot, and it just hasn't happened. So if it's not Richie James, then who? I know there are a lot of people that want the 49ers to kind of go outside looking for, a receiver. I've heard names like Golden Tate. I've heard names like Jamison Crowder on the Jets. And I would say, I doubt they go that route. I think just kind of looking at the receiver 3 position and how much they have that third receiver on the field, I think they just need a guy who they can just count on and be productive. It doesn't have to be a guy. So when you look at who they have and you say, okay, they're going to give these guys all opportunities before they go to an outside source. Richie James, you're first up. What are you going to do? We've heard Jawan Jennings has done a good job so far through, a couple of days in OTAs, whatever you take from that, but he's out there, right? Jalen Hurd, he's kind of coming back. Sounds like he's working out on the side. We'll see. We don't know, right? And I know everybody in this chat, they're not banking on Jalen Hurd just being a guy. But at the very least, you look at it and you're like, okay, we're going to see, right? They're going to wait and see. Mohamed Sanu, everybody wants a guy like, we want Golden Tate. And it's like, you're going to go and sign Golden Tate when you have Mohamed Sanu, who kind of gives you that same type of ability. So you look at it and I would think, ideally, they probably want Richie James to take control of it and be that guy because he has that type of ability to, really kind of be involved however they want. He can play inside, he can play outside, he can do all those things. He can also return punts and kicks as well, even though he's been kind of inconsistent doing it. But if it's not him, I would lean Sanu, but then you have the other guys. And I didn't even mention Kent Sherfield, for whatever reason, I thought Sherfield was like this, like 5'9", 5'10", 190-pound receiver. And I look at Sherfield, I Googled him. I'm like, this dude is 6'1", 220 pounds and ran in the 4.4. So he's another guy that will probably compete. Here's my question, and here's what I want to know. Will it end up being one or the other? And what I mean by one or the other, will it end up being Richie James or Ken Sherfield, right? Like, is it gonna be between those two guys that end up, making the roster? Like, or do they both end up making it? I know a lot of people aren't really talking about Sherfield, and he's kind of been a journeyman, and he spent some time with the Cardinals, got some, played over guys that they drafted that year, Andy Isabella, Hakeem Butler. He ended up playing and taking the snaps away from them. So will Sherfield end up kind of carving out a role as not just a return man, but maybe a guy that can get on the field on third downs? That's something that's going to be very interesting to see, especially if Hurd is healthy, if Jennings continues to do well during OTAs and kind of carries over to training camp. We're going to see. But if I had to bet money right now, I'd probably lean towards my guy, Richie James.